The Year to Their podcast, it's time to start the show. Be sure to hold on tight, here we go. Exploring all the different Disney destinations. Year to Their, it's time to start the fun.
Hello everybody and welcome to this week's Ear to Their podcast, Walt Disney World, Word of the Week. I am your host, Phil Gramlich, and each and every week I will bring you a different Walt Disney World word, and then I will give you background, hints, tricks, tips, history, all kinds of stuff about that word. So let's get right into it. This week's Walt Disney World Word of the Week is brought to you by the letter H. H for hoot, as in Hoot Gibson. And I apologize if you're one of my older podcast listeners and you are thinking I want to talk about the silent film rodeo star / actor / the guy did everything, Hoot Gibson from the 1920s, 30s, and 40s. I'm sorry, but this is actually a different Hoot Gibson that I will be talking about today. The Hoot Gibson that I'm talking about is an animated audio animatronic owl who was set to be the host and the narrator of the often talked about Western River Expedition. So I have gone into detail in the past about Thunder Mesa, the area of Frontierland that was supposed to be built after the completion of Phase 1 of the Magic Kingdom. Now, Thunder Mesa was supposed to have two headline attractions, right? The first one was a mine train style roller coaster, which would have been the first roller coaster ever in the Magic Kingdom, which of course eventually went on to become Big Thunder Mountain, or at least the concept of that attraction went on to fuel the concept for Big Thunder Mountain Railroad. And the second attraction, the other headliner, was supposed to be the Western River Expedition. Now, the Western River Expedition was supposed to be built right about where the area of Splash Mountain is today. And it was going to be huge, right? I mean, we're talking 64,000 feet of square footage, huge. So since the building was supposed to be that big and the area, the footprint was going to be that big, this attraction, the Western River Expedition, was going to be built basically inside Thunder Mesa. And all of the elements of the attraction would be hidden away inside this show building, which would look on the outside like a mesa or a huge rock formation. On the outside and over the mesa would be pack mules that would take you up to the top of the mesa, where there would be merchandise shops and restaurants. And after the death of Walt Disney in 1967, Disney and Walt Disney Imagineering was completely gung-ho and ready to go with this project. I mean, the Imagineers were hired, models had been made, the animatronics actually started to become a reality, and even the theme music was starting to be written for the Western River Expedition. So now you might be asking yourself, Phil, what was this Western River Expedition supposed to be like? Or at least that's what I'd be asking myself if I was in your shoes right now and listening on the treadmill or in your car or wherever you are. And if you're in your car, please be very careful driving and listening, because I know I can be extremely exciting. Okay, so what was this Western River Expedition supposed to be like, right? Well, think about it as basically a Pirates of the Caribbean style attraction, but set in the Wild West. Basically, to get into the queue, instead of going into a fort like in Pirates of the Caribbean, you would walk into Thunder Mesa through a cave. Now, once inside the cave, you would have looked up and it would have been like a Twilight kind of atmosphere. And when I say Twilight, I don't mean vampires and werewolves. I'm talking about actually Twilight, like the evening. So that was the queue. It was like a Twilight out in the desert. And then you would board a boat, your launch, like a Pirates of the Caribbean style boat, which would be your ride vehicle. And as the ride got started, as the attraction got started, you would be introduced to Mr. Hoot Gibson. Again, the owl and the narrator of the Western River Expedition. You would then go through scenes from the Old West. You would see bandits holding up stagecoaches. And actually, since this was Mark Davis's project, the famous Imagineer and Disney legend Mark Davis, and he was the one who was primarily in charge of the scenes in Pirates of the Caribbean, it would kind of have that kind of feel, that funny, whimsical, kind of irreverent sense of humor, right? So at the moment when the bandits were holding up a stagecoach, the bandits would be wearing bandanas around their faces, and so would the horses that belonged to the bandits. So they they both had the bandanas around their faces. Even the horses wanted to hide their identities. And that was an early concept of Mark Davis, who was one of the guys in charge of this attraction. So then he would go along and see singing cactuses. Yes, that's true. Singing cactuses or cacti. Somebody has to let me know if it's cactuses or cacti. I'm going to go with cacti this time. So you would see singing cacti. You would see cowboys out on the prairie playing guitar. You would then go through a town. And that's when the action got a little lively. Think the Pirates of the Caribbean sacking the city scene. And there would be a saloon with cowboys coming out of it. There would be a bank. There would be even like a morgue with a mortician standing there waiting for the next gunfight to happen. Like dancing girls doing a can-can. I mean, it would be a crazy scene. And then you would exit that scene, be warned and given a safety spiel again by your narrator and host, Mr. Al, not from the old school Tootsie Pop commercials, but Mr. Hoot Gibson, the Al. He would tell you to, keep your arms, legs, feet inside the boat at all times. You would go through a rapid section. You would encounter the bandits once again. Eventually, you would shoot out of Thunder Mesa, down some hills, and into, actually, which I thought was really cool, into the rivers of America itself. After that, you would exit the boat and be back in Frontierland. As I said, this attraction and the rest of Thunder Mesa was ready to go, ready to be built. They had music written, they had scale models created, they even had Mr. Hoot Gibson himself created. He was already done. The audio animatronic was ready to be put into the attraction. The problem was that after opening day of October 1st, 1971 in the Magic Kingdom, everyone who came to the Magic Kingdom, all the guests wanted to know where Pirates of the Caribbean was. See, when Walt Disney Imagineers had designed the Magic Kingdom, they had no intentions of putting a Pirates of the Caribbean into the park. They guessed that because Florida was so close to the actual Caribbean, that the average Walt Disney World guest would not want to hear stories of pirates in that area. Well, they were wrong. But the problem here was it wasn't that simple to just bag this huge concept like Thunder Mesa and replace it with pirates. As a matter of fact, Thunder Mesa and the Western River Expedition had been promoted as being huge parts of Walt Disney World since 1969. As a matter of fact, Hoot Gibson, our friend the Owl that this episode is all about, was set up on a perch in the exit area of the Walt Disney Story on Main Street, USA. Also in the room with Hoot Gibson was that huge model of Thunder Mesa and the Western River Expedition. So when guests got out of the film, The Walt Disney Story, there was Hoot on his perch, and you could walk up to him and hit a button, which would wake him up, and he would tell you all about the history of audio animatronics in the Disney parks. He would explain to you how the concept went from being just a sketch on paper or in Walt Disney's head to becoming the actual reality in the attractions and in himself, believe it or not. He was hooked up to a computer control console that he explained was actually making him use his words, make his movements, and that type of thing. And after he was done explaining the history of audio animatronics, he invited the guests to come back real soon and visit him on the Western River Expedition. As we already know, that never happened. So when the Walt Disney Story was taken out of that theater in 1981 and replaced with the Epcot Center Preview Center, yes, that is actually what it was called. It's a little difficult to say. The Walt Disney Imagineers dressed Hoot up in a tour guide costume, and he was given a brand new spiel telling guests all about the new audio animatronic figures that would be coming to Epcot Center in the very near future. Then in 98, the Walt Disney Story was again changed to the Disney's MGM Studios Preview Center, where Hoot Gibson was moved from a tree down to a director's chair. And he told guests all about the new upcoming park, Disney's MGM Studios. Unfortunately, once Disney's MGM Studios opened in 1989, Hoot Gibson really didn't have much to say. So he sat there in silence for a few months until he was permanently removed later in 1989. So where is Hoot Gibson now? Well, it's funny you should ask, because just recently I went on eBay and was able to buy Hoot Gibson. No, I'm kidding. I did not buy Hoot Gibson. Actually, he was retired, and in doing research for this episode, I was not able to find where the animatronic of Hoot Gibson actually ended up. So if you're listening to this and you have Mr. Gibson somewhere in your house on display, please let me know and send me a picture. I would love to see him. And that is going to do it for this week's Ear to There podcast, Walt Disney World Word of the Week. As always, thank you so much for listening. It is always greatly appreciated. I know I've talked about Thunder Mesa on here in the past, and I've talked about the Western River Expedition, but I haven't gone into detail about Hoot Gibson, so I kind of wanted to do that this week. So I hope you enjoyed this episode. It was a ton of fun for me to go back and do a little bit of research and try to find out where he was. I really enjoyed creating this one, and I hope you enjoyed listening to it just as much. So if you did enjoy this episode, please just tell someone about it. I know I ask that almost every week, but word of mouth really is the best way for this podcast to get around. So please tell someone about this episode. Maybe you have that big Magic Kingdom fan in your life, or that big Frontierland fan. Just tell them about this one. I think this is kind of a cool one, kind of an interesting one to share. All right, and just remember, there will be a new episode of the Walt Disney World Word of the Week each and every Wednesday morning, as well as a new episode of the regular Ear to There podcast each and every Monday morning. So until next time, thank you again for listening. Have a great week. Bye-bye.